Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Raven's Readings. I'm reading from the Inimitable Jeeves, a collection of short stories written by P.G. Wodehouse in 1923. In them, Jeeves, a valet, and his employer Bertie Wooster are all characters in dozens of little vignettes. The stories are all told from the point of view of Bertie. I do readings twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. If you subscribe to my Substack newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoy this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. This is part 2 of the delayed exit of Claude and Eustace. More romance with the cousins both in love with the same girl and wandering about the city. What if Aunt Agatha spots them? When the twins came in, I put it squarely to the Blighters. Jolly as it was to give Uncle George shocks, they must not wander at large about the metrop. "But, my dear old soul," said Claude, "be reasonable. We can't have our movements hampered." "Out of the question," said Eustace. "The whole essence of the thing, if you understand me," said Claude, "is that we should be at liberty to flit hither and thither." "Exactly," said Eustace. "Now hither, now thither." "But damn it, Bertie," said Eustace reprovingly, "not before the boy." "Of course, in a way I see his point," said Claude. "I suppose the solution of the problem would be to buy a couple of disguises." "Oh, my dear old chap," said Eustace, looking at him with admiration. "The brightest idea on record. Not your own, surely?" "Well, as a matter of fact, it was Bertie who put it in my head." "Me?" "You were telling me the other day about old Bingo Little and the beard he bought when he didn't want his uncle to recognize him." "If you think I'm going to have you two excrescences popping in and out of my flattened beards—" "Oh, something in that," agreed Eustace. "We'll make it whiskers then." "And false noses," said Claude. "Yes, and you say false noses. Righto then, Bertie, old chap. That's a load off your mind. We don't want to be any trouble to you while we're paying you this little visit." And when I went buzzing round to Jeeves for consolation, all he could say was something about young blood. No sympathy. "Very good, Jeeves," I said. "I shall go for a walk in the park. Kindly put me out the old Etonian spats." "Very good, sir." It must have been a couple of days after that Marion Warder rolled in about the hour of tea. She looked warily round the room before sitting down. "Your cousins not at home, Bertie?" she said. "No, thank goodness." "Oh, then I'll tell you where they are. They're in my sitting room, glaring at each other from opposite corners, waiting for me to come in. Bertie, this has got to stop." "You're seeing a good deal of them, are you?" Jeeves came in with the tea, but the poor girl was so worked up that she didn't wait for him to pop off before going on with her complaint. She had an absolutely hunted air, poor thing. "I can't move a step without tripping over one or both of them," she said. "Generally both. They've taken to calling together. They just settle down grimly and try to sit each other out. It's wearing me to a shadow." "I know," I said sympathetically. "I know." "Well, what's to be done?" "Beats me. Couldn't you tell your maid to say you're not at home?" She shuddered slightly. "I tried that once. They camped on the stairs. I couldn't get out all afternoon. And I had a lot of particularly important engagements. I wish you would persuade them to go to South Africa, where they seem to be wanted." "You must have made the dickens of an impression on them." "I should say I have. They've started giving me presents now. At least Claude has. He insisted on my accepting this cigarette case last night. Came round to the theatre and wouldn't go away till I took it. It's not a bad one, I must say." It wasn't. It was a distinctly fruity concern in gold with a diamond stuck in the middle. The rummy thing was, I had a notion I'd seen something like it before somewhere. How the deuce Claude had managed to dig up the cash to buy a thing like that was more than I could imagine. Next day was a Wednesday, and as the object of their devotion had a matinee, the twins were, so to speak, off duty. Claude had gone with his whiskers on to Hurst Park, and Eustace and I were in the flat talking. At least he was talking, and I was wishing he would go. "The love of a good woman, Bertie," he was saying, "must be a wonderful thing. Sometimes—" "Oh, good Lord, what's that?" The front door had opened, and from out in the hall there came the sound of Aunt Agatha's voice asking if I was in. Aunt Agatha has one of those high, penetrating voices, but this was the first time I'd ever been thankful for it. There was just about 2 seconds to clear the way for her, but it was long enough for Eustace to dive under the sofa. His last shoe had just disappeared when she came in. She had a worried look. It seemed to me about this time that everybody had. "Bertie," she said, "what are your immediate plans?" "Well, how do you mean?" "Well, I'm dining tonight with—" No, I don't mean tonight. Are you busy for the next few days?" "Oh, but of course you're not," she went on, not waiting for me to answer. "You never have anything to do. Your whole life is spent in idle, but we can go into that later. What I came for this afternoon was to tell you that I wish you to go with your poor Uncle George to Harrogate for a few weeks. The sooner you can start, the better." This appeared to me to approximate so closely to the frozen limit that I uttered a yelp of protest. Uncle George is all right, but he won't do. I was trying to say as much when she waved me down. "If you're not entirely heartless, Bertie, you will do as I ask you. Your poor Uncle George has had a severe shock." "What, another?" "He feels that only complete rest and careful medical attendance can restore his nervous system to its normal poise. It seems that in the past he has derived benefit from taking the waters at Harrogate, and he wishes to go there now. We do not think he ought to be alone, so I wish you to accompany him." "But I say—" "Bertie?" There was a lull in the conversation. "What shock has he had?" I asked. "Between ourselves," said Aunt Agatha, lowering her voice in an impressive manner, "I incline to think that the whole affair was the outcome of an over-excited imagination. You are one of the family, Bertie, and I can speak freely with you. You know as well as I do that your poor Uncle George has for many years not been, he has developed a habit of, how shall I put it? Shifting it a bit. I beg your pardon? Mopping up the stuff to some extent. I dislike your way of putting it exceedingly, but I must confess that he's not been perhaps as temperate as he should. He is highly strung and, well, the fact is he's had a shock." "Yes, but what?" "This is what it is so hard to induce him to explain with any precision. With all his good points, your poor Uncle George is apt to become incoherent when strongly moved. As far as I could gather, he appears to have been the victim of a burglary." "Burglary?" "He says that a strange man with whiskers and a peculiar nose entered his rooms in Jermyn Street during his absence and stole some of his property. He says that he came back and found the man in his sitting room. He immediately rushed out of the room and he disappeared." "Uncle George?" "No, the man. And according to your Uncle George, he had stolen a valuable cigarette case. But as I say, I'm inclined to think that the whole thing was imagination. He's not been himself since the day when he fancied that he saw Eustace in the street. So I should like you, Bertie, to prepare to start for Harrogate with him not later than Saturday." She popped off, and Eustace crawled out from under the sofa. The blighter was strongly moved. So was I, from the matter of that. The idea of several weeks with Uncle George at Harrogate seemed to make everything go black. "So that's where he got that cigarette case, dash him," said Eustace bitterly. "Of all the dirty tricks, robbing his own flesh and blood. The fellow ought to be in a chokey." "He ought to be in South Africa," I said, "and so ought you." And with an eloquence that rather surprised me, I hauled up my slacks for perhaps 10 minutes on the subject of his duty to his family and what not. I appealed to his sense of decency. I boosted South Africa with vim. I said everything I could think of, much of it twice over. But all the blighter did was babble about his dashing brother's baseness and putting one over on him in the matter of the cigarette case. It seemed to think that Claude, by slinging in the handsome gift, had got right ahead of him, and there was a painful scene when the latter came back from Hurst Park. I could hear them talking half the night, long after I had tottered off to bed. I don't know when I've met fellows who could do with less sleep than those two. After this, things became a bit strained at the flat, owing to Claude and Eustace not being on speaking terms. I'm all for a certain chumminess in the home, and it was wearing to have to live with two fellows who wouldn't admit that the other one was on the map at all. One felt the thing couldn't go on like that for long, and by Jove, it didn't. But if anyone had come to me the day before and told me what was going to happen, I should have simply smiled wanly. I mean, I've got so accustomed to thinking that nothing short of a dynamite explosion could ever dislodge those two nestlers from my midst, but Claude sidled up to me on the Friday morning and told me his bit of news. I could hardly believe I was hearing right. "Bertie," he said, "I've been thinking it over." "What over?" I said. The whole thing. This business of staying in London when I ought to be in South Africa. It isn't fair," said Claude warmly. "It isn't right. And the long and short of it is, Bertie, old man, I'm leaving tomorrow." I reeled in my tracks. "You are?" I gasped. "Yes," said Claude. If you wouldn't mind sending old Jeeves out to buy a ticket for me. I'm afraid I'll have to stick you for the passage money, old man. You don't mind?" "Mind?" I said, clutching his hand fervently. "Oh, that's all right then. Oh, I say, you won't say a word to Eustace about this, will you?" "But isn't he going to?" Claude shuddered. "No, thank heaven. The idea of being cooped up on board a ship with that blighter gives me the pip just to think of it. No, not a word to Eustace. I say, I suppose you can get me a berth all right at such short notice?" "Rather," I said. Sooner than let this opportunity slip, I would have bought the bally boat. "Jeeves," I said, breezing into the kitchen, "go out on first speed to the Union Castle offices and book a berth on tomorrow's boat for Mr. Claude. He's leaving us, Jeeves." "Yes, sir." "Mr. Claude does not wish any mention of this to be made to Mr. Eustace?" "No, sir. Mr. Eustace made the same proviso when he desired me to obtain a berth on tomorrow's boat for himself." I came to the man. "Is he going too?" "Yes, sir." "This is rummy." "Yes, sir." Had circumstances been other than they were, I would have at this juncture have unbent considerably toward Jeeves, frisking round him a bit and whooping up to a certain extent and what not. But those Etonian spats still formed a barrier, and I regret to say that I took the opportunity of rather rubbing it in a bit on the man. I mean, he'd been so dashed aloof and unsympathetic, though perfectly aware that the young master was in the soup and it was up to him to rally round. Couldn't help pointing out how the happy ending had been snaffled without any help from him. "So that's that, Jeeves," I said. "The episode is concluded. I knew things would sort themselves out if one gave them time and didn't get rattled. Many chaps in my place would have got rattled, Jeeves." "Yes, sir." "Gone rushing about, I mean, asking people for help and advice and so forth?" "Possibly, sir." "But not me, Jeeves." "No, sir." I left him to brood on it. Even the thought that I'd got to go to Harrogate with Uncle George couldn't depress me that Saturday when I gazed upon the old flat and realized that Claude and Eustace weren't in it. They had slunk off stealthily and separately immediately after breakfast, Eustace to catch the boat train at Waterloo and Claude to go round to the garage where I kept my car. I didn't want any chance of the two meeting at Waterloo and changing their minds, so I suggested to Claude that he might find it pleasanter to drive down to Southampton. I was lying back on the old settee and gazing peacefully up at the flies on the ceiling and feeling what a wonderful world this was when Jeeves came in with a letter. "A messenger boy has brought this, sir." I opened the envelope, and the first thing that fell out was a £5 note. "Great Scott," I said, "what's all this?" The letter was scribbled in pencil and quite brief. "Dear Bertie, will you give the enclosed to your man and tell him I wish I could make it more? He has saved my life. This is the first happy day I've had in a week. Yours, M.W." Jeeves was standing holding out the fiver, which had fluttered to the floor. "You better stick to it," I said. "This seems to be for you." "Sir?" "I say, the fiver is for you, apparently. Miss Warder sent it." "That was extremely kind of her, sir." "What the dickens is she sending you fivers for? She says you saved her life." Jeeves smiled gently. "She overestimates my services, sir." "But what were your services, dash it?" "It was in the matter of Mr. Claude and Mr. Eustace, sir. I was hoping that she would not refer to the matter, as I did not wish you to think that I had been taking a liberty." "What do you mean?" "I chanced to be in the room while Miss Warder was complaining with some warmth of the manner in which Mr. Claude and Mr. Eustace were thrusting their society upon her. I felt that in the circumstances it might be excusable if I suggested a slight ruse to enable her to dispense with her attentions." "Good Lord! You don't mean to say you were at the bottom of their popping off, after all?" Silly ass it made me feel. I mean, after rubbing it into him like that about having clicked without his assistance. It occurred to me that were Miss Warder to inform Mr. Claude and Mr. Eustace independently that she proposed sailing for South Africa to take up a theatrical engagement, the desired effect might be produced. It appears that my anticipations were correct, sir. The young gentleman ate it, if I may use the expression. Jeeves, I said, we Woosters may make bloomers, but we're never too proud to admit it. You stand alone. Thank you very much, sir. Oh, but I say, a ghastly thought struck me. When they get on the boat and find she isn't there, won't they come buzzing back? I anticipated that possibility, sir. At my suggestion, Miss Warder informed the young gentleman that she proposed to travel overland to Madeira and join the vessel there. Oh, and where do they touch after Madeira? Nowhere, sir. For a moment I just lay back, letting the idea of the thing soak in. There seemed to me to be only one flaw. The only pity is, I said, that on a large boat like that they would be able to avoid each other. I mean, I should have liked to feel that Claude was having a good deal of Eustace's society and vice versa. I fancy that will be so, sir. I secured a 2-berth stateroom. Mr. Claude will occupy one berth, Mr. Eustace the other. I sighed with pure ecstasy. It seemed a dash shame that on this joyful occasion I should have to go out to Harrogate with my Uncle George. Have you started packing yet, Jeeves? I asked. Packing, sir. For Harrogate. I've got to go there today with Uncle George. Oh, of course, yes, sir. I forgot to mention it. Sir George rang up on the telephone this morning while you were still asleep and said that he had changed his plans. He does not intend to go to Harrogate. I say, how absolutely topping. I thought you might be pleased, sir. What made him change his plans? Did he say? No, sir, but I gather from his man Stevens that he's feeling much better and does not now require a rest cure. I took the liberty of giving Stevens the recipe for that pick-me-up of mine, of which you have always approved so much. Stevens tell me that Sir George informed him this morning that he's feeling a new man. Well, there was only one thing to do, and I did it. I'm not saying it didn't hurt, but there was no alternative. Jeeves, I said, those spats? Yes, sir. You really dislike them? Intensely, sir. You don't think time might induce you to change your views? No, sir. All right, then. Very well. Say no more. You may burn them. Thank you very much, sir. I have already done so. Before breakfast this morning, a quiet grey is far more suitable, sir. Thank you, sir. End of chapter. Thank God the cousins are finally gone, with Aunt Agatha none the wiser. And the little tiff between Bertie and Jeeves is over too. Stay tuned for the next episode of the series, Chapter 17, Bingo and the Little Woman. Yet another brief romance. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoy this reading, or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Check out my other posts on my Substack at ravensview.substack.com. And remember to please share this with your friends. Ta-ta for now.